good afternoon or good evening. I'm not quite sure which hour it is in Pretoria when this will be shown, but I'm sitting here in the media room of the Harvard Business School and being taped. Let me start this lecture not like an American with a joke, but like a Japanese with an apology. I'm very sorry not to be able to attend your meetings because of circumstances beyond my control. But Lorenzo and his colleagues and associates have shared the program with me, and I must say it looks like an amazing conference. Indeed, studying the program, and that is what it took for me to understand what was going to happen in these days, reminded me of an upper C by Jacob Burckhardt, and this is my first slide. And it reads, "Beware of the terrible simplifiers." So since time is short and I'm supposed to talk about the future of regionalism, let me now talk like an American and start with a joke. There was a friend of mine, Hunter Rawlings, who was president of Cornell once, and he told me the following story. And this is a slide about a lion and myself. And the story goes as follows. When he was an undergraduate at Harvard many, many decades ago, he took a terrible course in classics. And the professor knew that it was a terrible course and that he had nothing useful to convey to his students. But in one lecture he said, "Wake up, here's one piece of practical advice which some of you may find useful sometime in the future. Someone may call you and say, 'Will you give a talk at some university?' way ahead before you can decide what you want to talk about. But they will insist on a title. When that moment comes, give them the title, 'The Lion in the Path.' That will assure you of a good audience and possibly a good laugh." So Hunter Rawlings, after he stopped being president at Cornell, got invited at Harvard to give a talk. And they called so far ahead of time that he hadn't a clue what he was going to talk about. So he called it "The Lion in the Path." And they made up a wonderful poster for him. He looked like the lion was draped around his head, and they were very mystified by the title of the talk. He got a great audience. He was nervous. And then he told a story at the beginning of the lecture, and he got a big laugh, and it was just all downhill from there in terms of the ease of the lecture. So rather than focusing just on the future of regionalism, I am going to talk for a little while about other things which are in my head, but which do relate to governance, innovation, and regionalism, the subject of your conference. And I will basically make 3 points. The first one will be about globalization, internationalization, and governance. The second one will be about polycentricity and innovation. And the final one will be about regionalism. So let me turn to globalization, internationalization, and governance. Globalization and internationalization are basically used as synonyms in today's public discourse, but also among scholars. When I was in graduate school a few decades ago, actually a millennium ago, the choice term was international interdependence. So globalization and internationalization, I believe, refer to very different phenomena, and it's very important to keep them straight. Globalization refers to the reconfiguration of borders and identities, to constitutive norms and processes, and things which often are referred to as glocalization. That is the Toyota production method of combining local with global. Globalization refers to the erosion of established boundaries, the transformation of identities and constitutive processes, new links forged between global and local actors, processes, and structures, and it is the preferred language of sociologists and anthropologists. So this is one way of talking about the shrinking of time and space. There's a second way of talking about time and space which goes condensed in our modern world, and that is the language of internationalization. And the Latin root of that term already signifies an important difference to globalization. It refers to the increasing density of interchange between existing units, internationes, between existing nations. So borders and state sovereignty figure quite importantly in this phenomenon, and the regulatory norms and processes are often linked to good governance, a subject of your conference. So internationalization refers to the erosion of established boundaries, increases in cross-border exchanges, and the dynamic density which increases in the system through trade, mobility of persons, mobility of ideas, capital, you name it. But despite the increasing density of the system, there is a persistence of identities as units, whether this is individuals, groups, or governments, search for new regulatory norms of good governance. And this is the preferred language of economics and political science. Now, the reconfiguration of state and society are due to the intersection between globalization and internationalization. And I'm throwing up here one slide in which I map out on 2 dimensions the shrinking of the state and the expanding of the state, and on the other dimension, the devolution to the subnational level and the delegation to the international level. And in this 9-cell entry, you will find the status quo in the central cell of the matrix, and you find various movements towards privatization or localization or transnationalization or supranationalization, movements which invoke and involve different forms of governance. So this is one possible way of organizing some of the papers and discussion which I think you're probably going to discuss during this conference week. Let me move to the second point, polycentricity and innovation. In American political science, there is a debate about power, which dates back half a century, and the enormously important and influential work by Robert Dahl. Dahl wrote about the first phase of power, the competition which we see in the political arena, in his case, in New Haven, Connecticut, and Mayor Lee. Soon thereafter, this pluralist view of power was critiqued by 2 professors, Bachrach and Baratz, who wrote 2 papers in which they said there is a second phase of power. It's invisible. You can't study it like pluralists do because it involves agenda setting and all these things which happen in institutions to validate one kind of view of the world and invalidate another. And after Bachrach and Baratz, there was a third wave of scholarship. Stephen Lukes and GovInn are the 2 most prominent exponents, who referred to structural aspects of power, which also occur in the invisible domain. And finally, the fourth phase of power involved Bonnet and Duval's 2005 article and book. We see basically a reception of Foucault and continental European social theory. So there are 4 phases of power, and power theory focuses on power largely as a set of relationships between actors, which one would study through rationalist and constructivist styles of analysis. Power theory and power analysis in international relations are very distinct. In international relations, power is studied by realists and liberals, and they do not primarily think about relationships, but often about actor attributes. An actor is strong because of capacities which inhere in the actor. And often, especially for realists, the capacities are materialists. That is, they might be GDP or military capabilities. So in this view, in international relations, the focus is primarily on coercion and institutions, all the institutions blending over into structures. So power theory and international relations theory are often like deeply divided, and I call it chopping at the gap. In order to understand power, we got to understand the intersection of power theory and power in international relations. So recent developments in international relations have in fact looked to power theory, and 2 concepts have captivated the imagination of analysts. One is soft power, largely engaging the third phase of power, or structural theorizing. And the other one is smart power, referring to but not fully engaging literatures on knowledge and information, as in the late Susan Strange and in Joseph Nye. So if we think about an example of power theorizing which has international implications, I'm thinking about going to the movies, like theorizing Slumdog versus Superman. This is a paper I'm currently writing with 2 colleagues, and it is informed by theorists on the left, like the late Foucault, not Foucault, the late Foucault after 1977, and his theory of governmentality. It is informed by theorists of the right, like Hayek, theorizing spontaneous orders, and it is informed by theorists of the center, particularly Michael Polanyi on science and the common law, and Alan Ostrom on the global commons. All of these theorists bring a view to power which elaborates on the 4th phase, that is on a diffuse and indirect set of power which has systemic effects. In fact, students of international relations have been perturbed by what they call the end of power, the title of the editor of Foreign Policy Analysis, Naim, and say that somehow it's no longer fun running the world, at least not fun for the elites. There are too many other people in the power game. Some other power theorists, like David Baldwin, with whom I just corresponded on this topic, are unwilling to engage Foucault because they say that's continental social theory, I don't understand it, and in this Baldwin is like Nye, and they're unable to respond to Hayek, Polanyi, and Ostrom. So rather than claiming that power's ending, which I find utterly preposterous, I rather think that different kinds of power are being recalibrated. The power to control through coercion and institutions and structures, and the power to innovate, a kind of circulatory power, which is system-wide, has effects, but cannot be attributed to particular elites or actors. Innovation and knowledge are the result of this kind of circulatory power. Let me finally go to the topic of regionalism. Regionalism is shaped at the intersection of globalization, internationalization, and the proliferating governance regimes which we are studying, and it also gives expression to polycentricity and innovation. So the first 2 points, I think, I'm arguing here, are leading us to place regionalism into its proper theoretical frame. Now, there are varieties of approaches of studying regionalism. One might be materialist. This is the 19th century theory of geopolitics. The second one would be imaginary or ideational regionalism. This is the field of critical geography. And finally, behavioral approaches to the analysis of regionalism or location economics. I respect all 3, and I'm advocating actually a combo regionalism in which we draw on one or the other, depending on the question which we pose. And in my book on A World of Regions in 2005, I used that approach. Now, in the analysis of regionalism in the recent past, there have been terrible simplifiers. One would be Mersheimer and the tragedy of power politics, in which he builds his argument around the central claim that water divides. This would have been news to the Roman Empire, because the Mediterranean did not divide the Roman Empire. The Mediterranean was, in fact, the hub of the empire, and it was very cheap in providing the transportation means of sending the legions from one end of the empire to the other by boat. It would also be a surprise to the Afghans, who have been a buffer between world powers for the last 200 years. Their land, not water, divides. And it would be a surprise to all the people, many, many scholars, who've written about the Indian Ocean paradigm, the North Atlantic paradigm, the South Pacific paradigm, and the East Asian paradigm, all of them organized around the notion that water unites, doesn't divide. A second simplifier is Robert Kagan, whose book The Revenge of Geography, and just out now, Asia's Quadrant, proposes a geographical determinism, which once you read the books carefully, makes you feel like you're trying to nail blubber to the wall. It is simply an argument which cannot be sustained, and he makes many, many exceptions. Rather than Kagan, I would point to the work by Harold and Margaret Sprout, Otto Hintze, and most recently Stefano Guzzini, who are specifying the range and causal priority of geographical determinants. Just to postulate that geography is relevant is not itself an insight. Regionalism can be studied from the perspective of institutions, identities and interests, and it is also open to the analysis of processual forms of analysis which look at practices. So it is, as a phenomenon, open to many of the leading approaches in the social sciences. Finally, regionalism in world politics today is organized and centered around the American imperium. In that imperium, over the last 40 to 50 years, there were a set of regions of enormous salience to American national interest: Western Europe, East Asia, and the Middle East. There were regions which were had somewhat salience in the American imperium. That was Latin America and South Asia. And finally, Africa was the region of low salience. The focus in the analysis of the book which I wrote was not on regional pivots or client states, but on the supporter states of Germany and Japan, which somehow acted as intermediary between the logic of the region and the political logic of the American imperium. Where we are now, I think, is that the nature of the imperium is changing and the nature of the regions are changing. And this will bring the study of regionalism, which motivates your conference, to the center stage, I believe, in world politics. So in sum, regionalism and its future are shaped by multiple governance arrangements. They're shaped by polycentricity and innovation. And they're shaped by the dynamics of regionalization processes and the evolution of the American imperium. Your papers, your panels, your workshop, and your conferences reflect on and may well contribute to the future of regionalism in world politics. Thank you very much.